I watched my mother slide a set of legal adoption papers across the table, right next to the salad bowl. She didn't look at me. She looked at the girls sitting in what used to be my father's favorite chair. Most daughters would be screaming, crying, or demanding an explanation. But I just kept chewing my steak, because I had already seen the truth hidden in the attic weeks ago. This wasn't a family lunch. It was an ambush. My name is Lily Rose, and for 19 years my life was a predictable, quiet loop of suburban perfection. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman who ironed her bedsheets and never had a hair out of place. We were a team, or so I thought, especially after my father passed away. It was always Lily and Evelyn against the world. Then came Sarah. Sarah was the daughter of my father's first wife, a woman my mother never spoke about. To me, Sarah was just a ghost from a past life, a name on an old child support check I found once in a desk drawer. But 3 months ago, Sarah showed up on our doorstep with a single suitcase and eyes that looked exactly like my father's. My mother didn't hesitate. She didn't even consult me. She opened the door, took the suitcase, and pointed Sarah toward the guest room. "She's family, Lily," was all my mother said that first night. But I knew better. I'm a quiet observer. I noticed the way my mother's hands shake when she pours Sarah's tea. I noticed the way she looks at Sarah with a mixture of guilt and a strange, desperate kind of hunger. It wasn't just hospitality. It felt like a debt was being paid in installments. Last Tuesday, I was looking for a spare light bulb in the attic when I found a wooden crate tucked behind the Christmas decorations. Inside wasn't just old clothes. It was a diary, my father's diary. The entries from 20 years ago didn't talk about a happy marriage. They talked about a secret agreement. They talked about a choice my mother made to keep Sarah away so she could have a clean start with me. So when the sun hit the dining room table today, and the air smelled like roasted lemon chicken, I knew what was coming. I saw the manila envelope tucked under my mother's placemat. "Sarah," my mother started, her voice cracking slightly. She reached out and placed her hand over Sarah's. "I spent a long time trying to make up for the years we lost. I know I'm not your biological mother, but I want to make it official. I want to adopt you." Sarah froze. Her fork hit the porcelain with a sharp clink. She looked at the papers, then at my mother, her eyes filling with tears. It was a beautiful, cinematic moment of redemption. Then Sarah's eyes shifted to me. She expected me to gasp. She expected a scene. Instead, I took a sip of my water and smiled. "It's about time, Mom," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I was wondering when you'd finally admit why she's really here. Do the papers mention the house in the valley too? Or are we saving that for dessert?" The color drained from my mother's face. The perfect adoption lunch was about to turn into a confession booth. The silence that followed my comment was heavy, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. My mother's hand, still resting near those legal papers, began to tremble. She looked at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head, or perhaps as if I had finally become the person she was always afraid I'd be, someone who saw through her. "Lily Rose," she whispered, her voice regaining that sharp parental edge she used when I was a child. "This is a private moment for Sarah. What on earth are you talking about?" Sarah looked between us, her eyes darting like a trapped bird. She wasn't the intruder I once thought she was. She was a pawn in a game she didn't even know was being played. "The house in the valley, Mom," I repeated, leaning back and crossing my arms. "The one Dad left to Sarah in the original will. The one you forgot to mention when you told her she was broke and had nowhere else to go. It's funny how a little dust in the attic can reveal so much when you're looking for a light bulb." My mother stood up so quickly, her chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. "That's enough. Sarah, honey, ignore her. She's just overwhelmed with the changes." But Sarah wasn't ignoring me. She pushed the adoption papers away, her gaze fixed on my mother. "Evelyn, what house? You told me my father left nothing but debt. You told me that coming here was my only option." The perfect lunch was cold now, the lemon chicken sat untouched, a centerpiece for a crumbling family dynamic. I watched my mother struggle to find a lie big enough to cover the truth. I could see the gears turning, how to spin this, how to make herself the victim. "I did it to protect you," my mother suddenly blurted out, her voice rising. You were young, Sarah. You were struggling. If I had given you that property then, you would have sold it, wasted the money. I wanted you to have a home here with us. I wanted to be the mother you never had. By lying to me? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut deeper than a scream. By making me feel like a charity case for 3 months while you sat on my inheritance? I felt a strange surge of adrenaline. For years, I had lived under the thumb of Evelyn's perfection. Every grade, every outfit, every word had to be curated. Seeing her unmask in front of the new daughter she so desperately wanted to claim was the most honest moment we had ever shared. It wasn't just the house, Sarah, I added, fueled by the look of betrayal on Sarah's face. The diary in the attic, it mentions a letter Dad wrote to you before he passed. Mom, did you burn that too, or is it tucked away in your jewelry box? My mother's face turned a ghostly shade of gray. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Sarah stood up, her chair falling backward with a thud. She didn't cry. Instead, a cold, hard mask settled over her features, a look I recognized from my father's old photos. She looked at the adoption papers, picked them up, and slowly, deliberately, tore them in half. I don't need a mother, Sarah said, her voice like ice. I need what belongs to me. She turned and walked toward the stairs, presumably to pack that single suitcase she had arrived with. My mother slumped back into her seat, her head in her hands, the image of the perfect woman finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. I stayed at the table. I picked up my fork and took another bite of the chicken. It tasted like victory, but it felt like ash. The sound of Sarah's footsteps echoing upstairs was the only thing filling the room. My mother didn't move. She sat there, staring at the torn pieces of the adoption papers like they were the remains of a bridge she had spent 20 years building. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone. She finally looked up at me. There was no anger left in her eyes, only a hollow, flickering fear. You don't understand, Lily. I kept this family together. Your father, he was a complicated man. He wanted to split his heart between 2 worlds, and I knew that would only break yours. Don't put this on me, Mom, I snapped. You didn't do this for my heart. You did it for your control. I stood up and walked toward the hallway. I knew exactly where I was going. My mother's bedroom was off limits to everyone, a sanctuary of velvet and expensive perfume. On her vanity sat the mahogany jewelry box, the one with the gold filigree and the tiny silver lock. Lily, don't you dare, my mother called out, her voice regaining a frantic edge as she scrambled to follow me. I reached the vanity first. I didn't need a key. I knew my mother. She hid things in plain sight because she believed no one would have the courage to look. I felt under the velvet lining of her makeup tray and pulled out a small flat key. I clicked the lock open just as she reached the doorway. Inside, tucked beneath a string of pearls, was a yellowed envelope. It wasn't burned. It wasn't destroyed. It was preserved, held captive in a box for years. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, bold, slightly messy, and filled with the warmth of a man I missed every single day. To my daughter, Sarah, it read. I turned around, holding the letter out as Sarah came down the stairs, her suitcase bumping against the banister. She stopped, her eyes locking onto the envelope in my hand. Is that it? Sarah asked, her voice trembling for the first time since the confrontation began. It's yours, I said, stepping past my mother and handing it to her. My mother reached out, a desperate clawing motion to grab the paper, but I blocked her path. Let her read it, Mom. It's been 20 years. Don't you think the silence has done enough damage? Sarah took the letter with shaking fingers. She tore the seal and began to read. As her eyes moved across the page, the tension in her shoulders didn't relax. It tightened. Her face went from pale to a deep, burning red. He didn't just leave me the house, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He left me a confession. He said he sent money every month. He said he'd begged to see me, but you told him I had moved away with my mother and didn't want anything to do with him. She looked at my mother, a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. You didn't just steal my money, Evelyn. You stole my father. You told him I hated him. The air in the room felt thin. The walls of our perfect house were closing in. This wasn't just about a hidden will anymore. It was about a lifetime of stolen moments, of birthdays missed, and hugs that never happened because of a lie told in the name of protection. Sarah grabbed her suitcase and headed for the front door. "I'm calling a lawyer," she said without looking back. "And don't bother checking the guest room. I'm not leaving anything behind." The door slammed shut, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. My mother collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying her face in her hands. "I only wanted a whole family," she sobbed. I looked down at her, the woman I had spent my whole life trying to please. I realized then that a family built on a foundation of lies isn't a family at all. It's just a well-decorated prison. "You had a whole family, Mom," I said quietly. "You just chose to be the warden instead of a mother." I walked back into the kitchen. The silence was back, but this time, it wasn't heavy. The next few weeks felt like living inside a ghost story. The house was too big, too quiet, and smelled faintly of the expensive cleaning products my mother used to scrub away the reality of what had happened. She barely left her room, emerging only to drink tea and stare at the front door as if Sarah might walk back through it with an apology. But Sarah wasn't coming back for tea. She was coming for everything. The first legal notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't just a claim for the house in the valley, it was a full-scale audit of my father's estate. Sarah's lawyer was efficient and ruthless. They weren't just looking for property. They were looking for the interest, the back payments of the child support my mother had intercepted, and the pain and suffering caused by decades of intentional isolation. "She's going to ruin us, Lily," my mother whispered, clutching the papers in her kitchen. "She's going to take this house. Where will we go?" I looked at the granite countertops and the designer light fixtures. For the first time, they looked like stolen goods. "Maybe we shouldn't have been here in the first place, Mom. If this was built on Sarah's inheritance, it was never really ours." "How can you say that?" she hissed, her eyes flashing with a spark of her old fire. "I raised you here. I protected you." "You didn't protect me from the truth, Mom. You just delayed it. And the interest on lies is much higher than the interest on a bank loan." The tension reached a breaking point when I was summoned to give a deposition. Because I had found the diary and the letter, I was the key witness. My mother's lawyer, a man who looked like he'd never lost a night's sleep in his life, sat me down in a cold office and told me I needed to be careful with my memory. "We don't want to say your mother hid the letter," he suggested, clicking his pen. "Perhaps she simply forgot where it was. Grief does strange things to the mind." Lily rose. "If you testify that she intentionally suppressed it, the fraud charges will stick." I looked at him, then at my mother, who was sitting in the corner of the office, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. She was waiting for me to save her. She was waiting for me to tell one last lie so we could keep our comfortable, quiet life. But then I thought about Sarah. I thought about the girl who grew up thinking her father didn't want her. I thought about the man who died thinking his daughter hated him. "I won't lie," I said, my voice echoing in the small room. My mother's lawyer sighed. My mother let out a jagged, broken breath. That evening, I met Sarah at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. She looked tired, but there was a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the ghost from the desk drawer anymore. She was a woman reclaiming her history. "My lawyer says you're cooperating," Sarah said, pushing a cup of coffee toward me. "Why? You lose everything if I win." "I already lost everything the day I realized my mother wasn't who I thought she was," I replied. "I'd rather start over with nothing than live in a house built on your father's regrets." Sarah reached across the table and touched my hand. It was the first time we had ever really connected, not as stepsisters, and not as rivals, but as two people who had been cheated by the same woman. "The house in the valley," Sarah said quietly. "It's beautiful, Lily. It has an orchard and a view of the mountains. When this is over, there's enough room for both of us." I looked at her stunned. "You'd let me stay there? After everything my mother did?" "You weren't the one who lied," Sarah said. "You were just another victim of the perfect family." But as I drove home that night, I saw the moving trucks parked in our driveway. My mother wasn't waiting for the court's decision. She was packing, but she wasn't packing for a new start. She was packing the silver, the paintings, and the jewelry, everything she could carry before the law caught up to her. The driveway was a graveyard of cardboard boxes and bubble wrap. My mother was moving with a frantic, desperate energy, trying to salvage the fragments of a life that had already shattered. She didn't look at me as I walked through the front door. She was too busy wrapping a crystal vase, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "The court issued an injunction, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "You aren't supposed to move anything out of this house until the audit is finalized." "I won't let her take it all, Lily," she screamed, dropping the vase. It shattered against the floor, 1,000 sparkling shards flying across the hardwood. She didn't even flinch. "I earned this. I gave your father the best years of my life. I gave him a perfect home." "It wasn't a home, Mom. It was a stage, and the play is over." I walked past her, heading toward the stairs. I needed to get my own things, but something stopped me at the landing. There was a loose floorboard near the attic entrance, one I had tripped over 100 times but never questioned. But today, the setting sun hit it at just the right angle, revealing a thin sliver of metal tucked into the groove. I knelt down and pried it up. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a small digital voice recorder, the kind my father used for his business notes. It was dusty, the battery long dead, but I took it to my room and plugged it into a charger. 10 minutes later, the device hummed to life. I pressed play. "Lily, if you're hearing this, it means you found the board, and it probably means your mother didn't change her mind." My father's voice was thin, tired, recorded near the very end. "I know she thinks she's doing the right thing. She thinks she's protecting our world. But a world without Sarah isn't the one I wanted for you. There is a second safety deposit box, Lily. The key is inside the lining of my old leather jacket. It's not for Sarah, and it's not for Evelyn. It's for you. It's the truth about why I stayed." My heart hammered against my ribs. I ran to the hallway closet and pulled out his old bomber jacket. I felt the hem, my fingers trembling, until I felt a hard rectangular shape. I sliced the silk lining with a pair of scissors. A small silver key fell out, along with a photograph. It was a photo of my mother and a man I didn't recognize, taken years before I was born. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "The only mistake I ever made." I realized then that the perfection my mother chased wasn't just about my father or Sarah. It was a shield for her own past. She hadn't kept Sarah away just to protect me. She had done it because Sarah's mother knew the truth about who Evelyn really was before she reinvented herself as the perfect suburban wife. My mother wasn't just a villain. She was a woman running from a ghost that looked just like her. I went back downstairs. My mother was sitting on a box, exhausted, her head bowed. I didn't show her the key, and I didn't show her the photo. Some secrets are heavy enough to sink a person, and she was already underwater. "I'm going to the house in the valley, Mom," I said quietly. "Sarah invited me. You should go stay with Aunt Martha. The lawyers will handle the rest." She didn't look up. She just nodded, a slow, defeated motion. I walked out of that house with nothing but a backpack and a silver key. As I drove away, I saw the for sale sign being hammered into the front lawn. Not by a realtor, but by the weight of 20 years of silence. The house in the valley was exactly as Sarah described. It smelled of pine needles and fresh air. Sarah was standing on the porch, waiting for me. We just watched the sunset over the mountains, the orange light bleeding into purple. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be Lily. And for the first time, that was enough. Job end question. If you found out your entire life was built on a lie told to protect you, would you forgive the person who told it? If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more from LilyCalmStories. Let us know in the comments where and at what time you're watching this video. We love hearing from our global family.